I'm just trying to make it all make sense.
The
More.
You
No.
Podcast.
Today I want to discuss the 4 different parts of the brain shared in Superbrain by Rudolph Tanzi and Deepak Chopra. When dividing up how our brain works into the most simple way, there's really 4 different forms of functionality when it comes to how our brain works. Having better awareness surrounding the 4 different ways your brain functions will allow you to have better control over your mind. And I want to go through some essential points of all 4 different parts of the brain in order for you to have a better understanding of how they work, so you can have better control over your mind. So I now want to go through the 4 different parts of the brain, starting with the instinctive brain. You must understand the nature of instincts being a necessary part of your life. And with that being said, you should be patient with fear and anger, but don't indulge them. Also, don't try to argue yourself out of your impulses and drives. And don't repress thoughts and feelings out of guilt. You must also be aware of fear and desire, because awareness helps to balance them. And lastly, it's vital to understand that just because you feel impulsive doesn't mean that you always have to act upon that impulse. You must consult higher parts of your brain. From here, the next part of the brain is the emotional brain. And the first essential point that's important to understand surrounding the emotional brain is to let feelings come and go. Don't hold on to negative feelings by justifying why you're right and someone else is wrong. Look at your emotional weak points. Things like falling in love too easily, losing your temper too fast, or becoming afraid of trivial risks. Also, start to observe your weaknesses when they come up, and ask if you really need to be having the reaction that you're having. If the answer is no, the unwanted feelings will begin to go back into balance. From here we reach the third part of the brain, which is the intellectual brain. The first essential point that you should be aware of surrounding the intellectual brain is that intellect means the mind's most recent evolutionary phase. Intellect also never operates in isolation, and it's blended with emotions and instinct. It's essential to understand that your intellect helps you rationally deal with your fears and desires. Responding to the world with intellect implies being responsible for the world. And the last essential point to understand surrounding the intellectual brain is that rational thought becomes destructive when it forgets its responsibilities. And this is why we've had the rise of atomic weapons and the destruction of parts of our ecosystem. And lastly, we reach the fourth part of the brain, which is your intuitive brain. The first essential thing to understand about your intuitive brain is that it can be trusted, and that feeling your way through life brings good results. It's also essential to understand that snap judgments are accurate, and this is because intuition doesn't need processing by the higher brain. With this being said, it's also essential to understand that reason is slower than intuition, but we often use reason to justify our intuition, and this is because we are taught to believe that reason is superior to intuition. And lastly, it's essential to understand that the intuitive brain has no foreseeable limits. Everything depends on what the mind wants the brain to do. Having awareness surrounding the essential points of the 4 parts of your brain will allow you to better create your own reality, and improving your ability at reality making will allow you to make tremendous impacts in the world and craft a life of significance.
I'm just trying to make it all make sense.
The
More.
You
No.
Podcast.